Welcome, I'm Ross Lauder, your host from Single Focus Talent, and I'm joined by our non-exec director, John Quigley, today.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Welcome to the European Tech Hire Podcast, where we help business leaders and individual contributors with actionable insights to hit their number and figure out the nuances of translating a global business into a European context, squeezing the essence of the lessons learned from Europe's top tech leaders. This is your guide to joining the fast track to European market scaling.
Today we welcome Luke Freiler, CEO, wartime CEO, no less, of Centercode. Centercode is a leading customer validation solution for gathering and prioritizing customer insights so teams can deliver market-dominating products. Particularly relevant today with the amount of technology that's being produced. Very keen to dive into Luke's environment and how he's working through various challenges that we're being presented with today. He's been at this for just shy of 20 years, so quite the veteran, and was very excited to have him on the show. So welcome, Luke.
Thank you, sir. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, look, let's kick off by kind of walking through your career. If you could share with us so far where you've come from, some of the choices you've made along the way, the inflection points that led you to the next level and next stages, and you know, why you're so passionate about what you're doing right now, if you would.
Absolutely. So I actually started my career quite young. Straight out of high school here in America, I was offered a job as a hardware engineer at Samsung. And it was kind of right place, right time. I had grown up as sort of a techie kid, had a bit of a reputation, and sort of friend of a friend recommended me, and I ended up getting a position in hardware. Spent my first couple years working on business computers and hardware products in Samsung before a big group of us sort of collectively moved to Ericsson, which, you know, a Swedish company, big telecom company. So I spent a number of years there early in my career at these two huge tech companies, very long-standing, well-respected tech companies. And I can say, while I learned a lot, I definitely didn't love the enterprise environment sort of culturally for myself. And I saw myself as leaving to start something at some point, but I really needed something I loved. And it was actually at initially Samsung, but ultimately Ericsson, that I really fell in love with the sort of early versions of the usability idea and the idea that products and technology should be friendly, it should be accessible, it should solve real problems. And it was actually at Ericsson that I moved from hardware to software, and I sort of inherited a team and built a team around web technologies, which at the time were relatively new. And our responsibilities were basically anything for a specific product line that involved the web. So everything from the accessible kind of web-based firmware on the product to the marketing site, intranets, and so on. And again, it was during this experience that I really fell in love with the idea that things should be useful and friendly. And from there, I was tasked one day by a product manager to run a beta test for a product that we were working on. It was this $50 million product. It was a new idea at Ericsson. And he came to me, and I owned the web team at this point, and he said, "Hey, I need you to run a beta test for this product." And I said, "Okay, well, what does that mean?" And he said, "Well, you know, you get a bunch of customers to," and I said, no, I understand what a beta is. What does that mean in the context of Ericsson, this 100-year-old, 100,000 person tech company? We must have a process for this that I can go follow. I don't need to make this up. And he said, "Yeah, I couldn't find one. If you can, feel free to use it." And I was very confused at the moment. I literally said, like, "Hey man, I have this 3-inch guide on how to use our logo. It's impossible to me that this idea of engaging customers before we get a product out, it's absolutely crazy to me that that's not something we've written down." And he kind of, you know, shook his hands at me and said, "Look, man, I don't know if you can find it, do it." And I said, "Okay, well, can I outsource it? You know, I don't know how to do this, and we're on a schedule here. Can I find someone else to do it?" And he said, "Sure, I can get you budget. Just go find a vendor." And I started digging around and realized that this was an untapped market. And I started reaching out to everyone in my network to ask how they ran beta tests of their products. And it turned out that basically everyone had the same problem. It was something that landed on a product manager's lap very late in the process. It was something that was incredibly infrequent. So by the time they had to do it, they just kind of rushed it together, came up with something ad hoc. And by the time they had to do it again, 12 to 18 months later, they forgot everything they learned. And as a result of this sort of infrequent episodic need, it was what everyone was kind of describing as a necessary evil. And to me, the idea of a necessary evil is the ultimate in business opportunity. It's something that you have to do, but it sucks. And I saw that as an opportunity, and I decided to leave Ericsson and take a few people with me and basically start a company around that. So the earliest idea was about 19 years ago, almost 20 that we started this. The earliest idea is actually not very different from the core of what we're approaching today. The market's changed, our mentality has changed, products have changed. Of course, our product and our vision has grown immensely, but the basic idea of really helping companies bring products to market with the help of enthusiastic customers is what we actually set out to do from the very beginning. And we've since had the pleasure of doing that for hundreds of enterprises and really iconic names in technology and business in general. So obviously there's a lot of stories in there, and I'd be happy to dive into any of it, but it came out of just this serendipitous opportunity of being asked to do something that to me seemed like it should have been a solved problem, and it simply wasn't. And it turned out to be a problem that many, many companies had. So that was pretty good for us.
No doubt. And it's funny you say that, because you're bringing me back to my university days. I took a class in my second year, which was around design and usability. And we literally had a series of lectures on the website. I don't even know if it's still around, called baddesigns.com. And it was literally all of these faux pas and, absolute epic fails of horrendous user interfaces. And some of them were hardware based, like they were parking meters, parking machine, pay machines and that sort of stuff. As to you couldn't actually use them. They weren't actually possible. And I think we're going through a monumental shift globally now, where software is being pumped out at a level that's never been seen before in human history, quite frankly. And I know methodologies have changed from being very rigid to being very robust. There's waterfall and agile, etc. And we've moved from manual to automation testing. And I've hired many devs around this kind of space. And I'm curious to know, what's your sense of the way that the industry has progressed and the ever increasing demand on effective testing to roll out, and the kind of the timeliness and the urgency around that? Can maybe share some of your experience around that, if you would?
Yeah, awesome question. And things have definitely changed a lot. Really, there's about four things that I think have changed in our market and sort of challenges for our customers that are impacting everyone that you're thinking about. The first, and you sort of touched on this, is everything's gotten more sophisticated. Virtually any product that comes out today, by the nature of just sort of building upon prior ideas, everything is getting more complex. There's a lot more that can go wrong on all sides, from being buggy to being hard to use. On top of that, everything's getting more connected. There was a time when companies could put out a product, and as long as it did what it was designed to do and worked, they were good. And now your product, almost any product, needs to work with other products that you don't have control over to succeed. And I'll go back to that in a moment. But the third one, and again, you touched on this, is that everything is now continuous. It used to be sort of this fire and forget mentality based on this kind of waterfall approach of building a big product, getting it out the door and moving on to the next. And that doesn't happen anymore. Now that software is embedded in so many products, the software evolves, and you look at the example of something as simple as a thermostat. 10, 20 years ago, you bought a thermostat and it lasted for 10 to 20 years. And it just did what thermostats do. Now, my thermostat is a Spotify player. I don't know why, but it is. I discovered it when looking for devices on my phone. Nice. And it talks to, so many other products in my house and my phone and so on. And the company that made that thermostat needs to worry about that. Frankly, that's keeping a product manager up at night. And therefore, because of those changes and because of that sophistication, they're required to continuously innovate and keep working on it. And then the fourth one that is very important as well is, because everything is earning, technology, and there's software behind everything now, this space is sort of the gold rush of the century. And therefore, there's a lot more companies moving into it. So there's a lot more competition. And, I used to tell a story, sort of an anecdote, that we tested a smart dog collar years ago. And at the time, that was novel. It was a good example. This is maybe 5 years ago. And it was a smart dog collar. And then a few months later, we tested another one. And I thought it was almost weird that there was two smart dog collars that we got access to that quickly. And so I asked one of my product managers, specifically for something I was speaking at, to go find out if there's any others so I can use this as an example. Because if we worked on two, there must be, 4 or 5 out there. And he actually brought me back a list of 30. And there were 30 different smart software and connected enabled dog collars out there. And that was just a fascinating thing to me about how sort of competitive all of this has gotten. So those are the big changes. And what that's led to in our space is a need to not just run this 4 or 8 week sort of beta test, but rather to continuously engage with these customers as the product evolves, and getting people to shift the mentality of how they engage their customers and test, not to just pre-testing as far as a big beta and then kind of customer success, listen to your customers after that. Every time they put out a new release that hasn't been touched by real customers, there's an enormous and growing risk that it's going to effectively brick all of the success that they've had so far. So that need to continuously test is something that our customers have migrated to as they've migrated to this methodology of continuously developing. And that's something that some companies, the what we call a high growth company, high growth technology companies, that's kind of in their DNA. They started in this environment, in this era, and it's just how they think. Other companies, and sort of the bigger it is, the more challenging it is, have a very different problem, right? When we're talking to what we dub the modern enterprise, the Procter and Gamble's and Ford's, the Citibanks, these huge companies that in many cases have been around 100 years, they don't think of themselves culturally as technology companies, but they're all getting pushed into that space very quickly. They're all going through their digital transformation and whatnot. And this is a big challenge for them because they don't have it in their DNA. It's not sort of in their, within the culture of that company to think this way. So they're all working to adapt to it as quickly as they can to stay competitive and, hopefully not have their lunch eaten by those high growth tech companies that are, the disruptors we all know by name.
I think that's very astute, and I think for me, what's very cool about the world we live in today is that you can test with a live audience in real time with actual real customers, which really didn't exist before. It was kind of more focus groups and very controlled environments, etc. And I've actually just literally started reading a book this morning, which is called Hook Point by Brendan Kane. And the subtitle is How to Stand Out in a 3-Second World. So, he intros the book by talking about how a smartphone user today has more access or availability of information than the president did in the late 90s, so that all of human progress is available in the palm of your hand. However, that becomes the biggest challenge today because you're trying to vie for somebody's attention. And his point is that you need, he's a marketer, right? So and one of my passions. So he's talking about grabbing people's attention inside of 3 seconds. How do you guys find that with the kind of like, I just find users super flippant these days. How do you guys find that within your customer base?
I think the most important thing, and this is something we sort of zero into with every customer, is really focusing on what problem the product is solving. And for me, one of the most important things about technology is that it needs to solve a real problem. And that problem can be diverse. It can reduce friction. It can increase our capabilities. There's a lot of things technology can do, but it needs to solve a problem. And once you've identified the problem, you then need to find the people who have that problem and are passionate about solving that problem. And that problem's their pet peeve, whatever it is. They're what is going to align that market. And if you can align the problem and the people with the problem, then you can get them riled up about solving it and be just enthusiastic about participating in that. And that's a really big thing for us is just making sure we understand the problem, making sure we can find the people who have it, and then connecting the dots. And it's all about sort of orchestrating that. And you're right. Today, it's incredibly easy to do that. Whereas a decade, 2 decades ago, it was much, much more challenging. There's so much, it used to be when we started this, it was sort of new enough to where many users of a mainstream product wouldn't even necessarily be online yet. But you're right now in that everybody has a phone, everybody has sort of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in their pocket, and they can get to everything. And it really, you're absolutely right. It does come down to attention span. But
so Luke, in terms of this digital evolution, I'm curious, our meta research indicates that about 70 to 95%, pretty high, of digital transformation efforts fail. Yeah, so in the B2B space, digital commerce has accelerated more this year, right, in 2020 than from 2010 to 2019. So the previous 9 years, right? So, we know that market leaders are focused on agile digital kind of go-to-market evolution that reduces friction in the customer journey. And, pragmatic investments in that area have a rapid impact on revenue. We know that. And it seems like you're completely focused on the customer experience. And for our audience, customer experience in a B2B context is defined as reducing friction throughout the buyer's journey and kind of being easy to buy from, really. And we understand that laggards are focused on incremental improvements to the customer journey, and market leaders, they just take a blank page approach to designing processes that provide a differentiated experience. Now, I know you're part of the Forbes Technology Council, and speaking of laggards, I read your take on technology laggards and what they can teach us. Can you share that philosophy with our audience?
To be honest, I wrote that one a while ago. So
yeah, no, it's okay. It's really the context of it. Really was kind of you were talking about kind of it helps when you're progressing your business. It's a real learning opportunity for leaders, right, to take note of where competitors have gone wrong. But that was the context. It points the way for you where the competitors have gone wrong.
Okay, yeah, I am trying to remember that one because that was a while ago, and pretty much everything in COVID now makes the world feel like 3 years have passed.
Yeah. So in that context, I suppose, right? And to Ross's point as well, some people are early adopters, some people, don't take the technology, some people are finicky, some, so kind of across that whole adoption life cycle of technology, what's your favorite? Like, where's your sweet spot? Who do you go after? How do you do that?
Yeah, so what you would sort of consider exactly the sort of laggards and market leaders, we break our market up into three pieces. I already used two of the phrases, I'll use them again. We think of high growth technology companies as sort of the Pelotons and the Rokus and the Fitbits of the world. These are the companies that grew up in this environment. They are entirely digital. There's no transformation to be had. And they're ahead of the curve on continuous delivery, DevOps. I mean, this is the stuff they get. They grew up in that environment. That to us is a big sweet spot. That's probably about 40 to maybe 50% of our customer base is those types of companies.
So it's probably like kind of CI/CD, right? As they call it, yes. Continuous integration, continuous development. Yeah, okay.
Virtually all of those companies started with that mentality in mind or adopted it very quickly. And again, you're sort of talking about companies that are primarily based out of Silicon Valley, and there's a lot of relationships between them and a lot of inner learning going on. Our classic company before that, we refer to as a classic technology company, and that's the Dells and Logitechs of the world, the companies that you think of as a technology company. And they're the ones that at one point we thought of them as the absolute leaders in innovation, and they're still innovating very heavily, but they're not quite as agile, and they're still working on those adoptions. And that's kind of the middle now. They used to be at the absolute forefront. Now they're much larger companies, a lot more sort of bureaucracy, and they're not necessarily as agile as they'd like to be, but they're all, you know, continuously working to improve, and they do have technology at their core. And then the final one, I referred to them as the modern enterprise. And the modern enterprise to us is anyone that really you don't think of as a tech company. And again, that's Ford, Procter & Gamble. Those are good examples of companies that really are tech companies at nowadays, but they haven't earned that reputation yet. And those are the ones that are really trying to figure this all out. And one thing that is very nice, at least for us, is not just due to recent circumstances, but really in the last decade, they've been getting much more open-minded about how to approach their audiences, how to operate, you know, technology at scale, and so on. But they're very much behind the curve naturally, because they've already had business models that have been building and evolving for, you know, decades, and in some cases a century or more.
Okay, I like that. We were speaking earlier, and we always talk to leaders that are on our show about their superpower. When we were speaking earlier, you had told us that your superpower is probably adaptability. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that one, you know, I've definitely thought about this a lot over the years, and what sort of makes me stand out as a leader. At Centercode, one of our sort of core tenets for operating is just the idea that you need to be able to roll with the punches, and you need to be able to be adaptable to get by, because we're forging new territory. We're creating new things, we're solving new problems, and we're not going to get them all right, and we're going to have to learn a lot. So it's really baked into the culture of the company. But it also starts with just how I started. You know, I came out of this as an entrepreneur, just looking to solve a problem. And in all the time, the vast career I've had at Centercode, I've served to basically handle every role within the company. I've ran marketing, I've ran sales. I think the only team I haven't ran at this point is finance, which is definitely a gap for me. But other than that, I've had the opportunity to learn and run virtually every organization within the company, and it's all come out of necessity. You know, just going through kind of what's being thrown at us. So I've had lots of opportunities to be adaptable, but I've taken that and turned it into a strength and an asset for the company. And as a result, I think that's really benefited us a lot. And it's sort of baked into our culture at this point.
I like it. The CEOs are constantly asking themselves questions, you know, and a lot of them are similar. We talk to a lot of CEOs on this show, and an example would be questions like, when do I next raise money? So every CEO worries about that question all the time. Am I wrong there?
No, you're pretty spot on.
And from my own experience, my only kind of glib answer to that question, when do I next raise money, is kind of like, when? Now. How much? Well, you know, as much as you can. Yeah. From who? Probably the best VCs who will fund you. That's who. And what terms? If I could add that one in, probably the best you can find. So let me throw a philosophy at you here and tell me what you think. Because you have been involved in technology since this time. So in 2002, I know it's a long time ago now, but in 2002, there were only two types of startups in existence: those that had raised a large amount of money at a ridiculous valuation prior to April 2001, or those that were dead. So there wasn't any other type of startup in 2002 when the internet bubble burst. So, you know, these decisions, when do I next raise money, you know, can have a big impact. And a quote from some famous VC, I forget his name, kind of went something like, all companies go out of business for the same reason: they run out of money. So kind of speaking as a recovering CEO myself of a few software companies, the the lesson I learned was that, at the time, my primary and foremost responsibility was to keep the organism alive, or keep the lights on and the shutters up, or whatever metaphor you want to use, or keep gas in the tank, or whatever.
Yep.
So that's where I'm coming from on the kind of, when do I raise money now? Because there's so many companies that meander and push financing back, because they've had a few decent months of revenue, or if we can get a few more good quarters, we can reduce dilution, and so the tendency is always to want to do it later, because you're an optimistic entrepreneur and you believe in a bright future and all that kind of stuff. So like, raising money is always better than sooner, but that's only true if everything really turns out rosy.
Yeah.
And that philosophy can backfire on you. I mean, how many companies do you think this has backfired on due to COVID? So
many, and I can tell you our story in that regard as well. But,
yeah, that's what I'm getting to. So like, that's my philosophy. That's why how much now, and all that stuff should be pulled forward. What do you think?
Yeah, I can definitely say that COVID changed my perspective a bit, because I have a lot of friends who are in a lot of pain right now, and I've already had some lose their businesses, and I expect more. So for us, I'll go back a little bit and tell you a bit of our story. I definitely think it's kind of interesting. We've had kind of a unique run, so much so that I think we actually are an outlier in your 2001 story, because we were dumb enough to start this company just before that. The nice thing about us in starting this company is we were incredibly young, and therefore we had very few responsibilities in the world. We didn't have families, we didn't have mortgages. We could do that very classic, live on ramen thing and get by with very little money. So we were building this from scratch at probably the worst time ever to start a startup. Although, I guess arguably 2008, 2009 would be on par for many. But when we started, we bootstrapped, and that was a big part of our world. We knew that we couldn't raise VC at that point in time. For the first few months of our existence, we theoretically could have, but we were still trying to build a kind of an MVP and an idea. So it wasn't realistic yet. But we bootstrapped for many years. And it wasn't until about 15 years into our story, and we were profitable and doing well. We weren't at some huge scale, but it definitely was somewhere between, a growing company and a lifestyle business, in terms of we were making good money, we were profitable, we didn't know anyone anything. But my prior partner who was our original CEO. And part of the story here is when I started this company, I wasn't CEO. I was the founder. It was my idea, but I didn't want to run it. I wanted to run the tech side, the product side. I kind of had an engineer, background at that point. And I brought in my prior boss from Ericsson to be our CEO. And he was a much more sort of conservative guy. And he really was okay running it as sort of a boutique business. And at a certain point, I took over the CEO role for a number of reasons, but mostly I kind of mentored into it. And I was kind of the vision and the passion behind the company. And we played a little bit of musical chairs. He became the CFO, which was a little more aligned with his background. And I took on sort of the visionary role. And it was at that point that I decided that we're going to need some capital to scale this. And started thinking about it. But at the same time, I wasn't looking for it yet. I was just thinking about it. And it came to me. The best time to raise money, it's not available to everyone, but the best time to raise money is, of course, when you don't need it. And someone came to me, and it was a very weird situation of, I was standing outside. This is about 4 or 5 years ago. I was standing outside my office waiting for my CTO, who was a co-founder and was part of our musical chairs. I was now CEO. And I was waiting for him to go to lunch. And this guy walks up to me, who I didn't know. And he just said, "Hey, I noticed that you and your buddy are driving much nicer cars nowadays. What's going on upstairs?" And I said, "Oh, well, we had a number of good quarters." And I had sort of a joking bet with my CFO that if we hit 12 good quarters in a row, I'd go buy this car, and just was sort of a fun thing. And it turned out that my CTO fell in
People
love
do that after 12 good days of sales these days.
Yeah,
you know?
no, it was I was pretty conservative about it. But the funny part was my CTO fell in love with the car, and he went and bought a matching one for circumstances, a week later. So we had matching cars, which looked cute, but it wasn't really deliberate. He actually wanted a different one. They just happened to have that one in stock, so he took it. So anyway, but this guy kind of saw that and thought it was interesting and hit me up about it. And it turned out that he owned a private equity firm that primarily, or actually exclusively, invested in software companies, business software companies. And this was our first introduction, was literally just, hey, I saw you guys buy nice cars. What's going on? And that turned into a lunch the next day. And by the end of that lunch, he offered to make an investment in the company. And it was a good deal for us. Again, we weren't looking for money at that point yet. We were just thinking about it. And it worked into a really nice relationship. So we used that to grow some. And then during that deal, he had a friend who owned another private equity firm, a growth equity firm, who happened to sort of catch wind of us and reached out to me. But I didn't really want to give up that much equity. I wasn't really looking for that much. So I basically told him, no, not the time. And he tracked me from that point on. And then about 5 years later, which was last year, he approached me and said, hey, I'd really like to make an investment. I understand that you've grown. I understand that the valuation is not going to be what it was, a few years ago, but I'd really like to get in on this. I think it's something, very valuable. And at the time, I wasn't raising money. We didn't need money actually for, our immediate needs and our roadmap, but I liked him. I thought that having more cash in the bank would allow me to do more, and the deal was going to be on my terms. And the funny part is, and you just made me think of this when you were giving your part, but my attorney desperately tried to talk me out of it. And I hope she listens to this because I'm going to give her help. She just said, we don't need the money. You don't need it. Don't give up more equity. Don't give up more equity. And, she's awesome. She's amazing, but she's very protective of the company, and she values it very, very highly, of course. And she just thought bringing in another partner is, potentially more trouble for something we weren't looking for. And then, of course, COVID struck. And I'm, in a very advantageous position to where I happen to, again, sort of serendipitously raise money right before COVID. So I had plenty of cash in the bank going into it. It certainly still hurt, and those months were painful, of course, like they were for everyone when budgets just sort of froze, but it let me sleep at night a hell of a lot better than it would have had I not raised money. So to your point of, raise as soon as you can, I did as soon as I could, and I would certainly do it again now because, despite some advice from various people that, if you don't need it, don't take it. You never know what's going to happen. And to the credit, by the way, of the investor, one of the things he said that did stick in my mind, this is a year ago, was, yeah, the economy's rocking right now, but we don't know what next year looks like, man. Anything can happen. And he said that to me. And at the time, it felt very strategic on his part. He clearly did not predict COVID, but he was right. And, because of it, we're all in a better place now, have a great relationship with them. They've been, really good investors. And I'm much happier than I think I would have been otherwise.
Wow. Wow, that's quite profound. And I'm really blown away by a lot of what you've said there. I suppose for me, what's standing out is definitely the adaptability piece. I mean, you've shared a transition across a number of different roles by way of, I suppose, invoking different skill sets, as it were. So what I'm curious about is, like, I'm quite a technical guy. I can certainly appreciate that element. Leadership, you've got sales, all of those sorts of facets, which require, I think, a set of philosophies. And any organization we speak with, they have defined, I often say it's like defining your religion. It's like, nailing your stake in the ground or mark in the sand or what have you. It's a set of kind of value sets that you live by. Now, we've shared already so far, roll with the punches and adaptability, and I see them as being key. And I remember being part of organizations like, if you identify a problem, please by all means bring it to us, but moreover come with suggested solutions. Maybe could you share with us from a leadership perspective some of the value sets that you like are non-negotiable in your organization that you live and die by? If I'm a candidate coming to work at your organization, like, why would I be a fit? What do I need to exemplify?
Absolutely. And this is something we definitely think about a lot. I have sort of a right hand at the company who runs operations, and her and I spend, I would argue potentially way too much time thinking and talking about this stuff, but it's definitely been very valuable. And we certainly have a series of core values, the first of which we've already covered, which is adaptability. So there is definitely a number of things that I care about. The first, beyond adaptability, would be we want people who are very passionate about what we do. One of the interesting things about our business is we are naturally bleeding edge. We have access to lots and lots of technology and information that is not out yet. And therefore, I've sort of explained to people that, look, if you're not a techie, if you don't appreciate the impact of technology on our lives, then one of the most interesting and unique perks about being here, which is getting access to what comes next, is lost on you. And it's almost the equivalent of a value that I can offer that would attract the right person that would be completely lost on you. Therefore, you're just simply not a fit. So being passionate about really technology solving problems and helping facilitate that is important. I definitely think early in my career, part of why I've dedicated so much of my adult life to this is because I knew that I wanted to have as big an impact on technology as possible. And I knew that if I went to any one company, I would be limited to their sort of ecosystem, or whoever uses their products. Even if it's a big company like Apple or Google, there are limits. And I see us as having the ability to have that impact, but with no limits. I mean, we work with both of those companies. So that to me is awesome. The next big one, which I will admit has been huge for COVID, is just a collaborative attitude. There's really no silos at Centercode. We don't think about a chain of command, really. It really is an incredibly collaborative environment. And I think that's part of what allowed us to go from an entirely in-office, mostly local group to entirely remote over the course of, a weekend, and doing really without dropping anything. So I was very happy about that. The next thing that we pitch to everyone is everybody here really has to have a measurable impact. And you need to be impactful in how you approach your work. And one thing we say is we don't, we value productivity, not long hours. It's not a crunch company by any stance. So we're looking for people that are going to be proud of the impact they have on our mission, and that's something that they will strive for and measure, and that's very important. Another one, and I've got just a couple more. Another one that's very big to us is being curious. Everybody has to be intellectually curious. Again, that's sort of the nature of kind of a company driven by an engineer, is you really have to ask a lot of questions. You have to be able to admit what you don't know. That's something that we ask of everybody. We tell everybody very clearly that there's no punishment for making a mistake. The only time we get upset is if you make the same mistake over and over again, but we can't learn and grow if we don't make a lot of mistakes. So you have to be curious, you have to be experimental to get by. And then finally, the last one, which I can tell a story about when I tried to kill it. But we have a value, which is we want people to be virtuous. And that was something that my HR gal was very passionate about and sort of saw as being part of our culture. I frankly didn't like it because it seemed like it should be innate. Like it seemed like it was almost, talking down to someone or trivializing to say, I want you to be a good person. Like I think everyone, innately thinks they're a good person. And I actually thought, I wanted to get rid of that one in exchange for another one. And it was actually my sales leader that came in and showed me a couple opportunities of the sales team taking a smaller deal for the good of both the customer and the long-term health of the company, but at their own expense of the commission that would have came from that. And it was that kind of led me to, okay, I get what we're saying here is if we've got some really tangible examples to tell stories and we're not just telling people, hey, be a good person, then I do see why this is so important and how it really is part of how we think and how we want people to think. So those are really what we consider to be kind of our core values, and a lot of exercise we've went through to make sure those are things that we live up to and that we speak about from, the job posting to the, somebody's last day at the company. Those things are very important to us.
Yep, I can totally relate to that. And I haven't seen anyone be successful without those kind of core traits built in, as it were. I suppose in Ireland and on this show, we talk about this on a regular basis, which is having the crack, spelled C-R-A-I-C, not the narcotic type. But what that really embodies is, we work hard, but we don't take ourselves too seriously. We're very kind of, humble and open to the fact that, you know what, and I fundamentally believe this as a philosophy, the world would be an awful lot of a better place if every single human being turned around and goes, could be me here that's wrong. But I suppose one final question as we wrap up here, Luke, can you maybe share with us who inspires you and what kind of a daily routine looks like for you that's made the difference for you personally?
Yeah. So this one's a little strange, but I'll use it because I love it. I referenced a few times the co-founder that was our original CEO, and he had been our CEO up until he was our CFO, and he was the greatest mentor I ever had. And I keep speaking to him in the past tense because unfortunately cancer got him a couple years ago. So he was with the company up until the end. We were great friends. I lost my father at a pretty young age, and he was about 20 years my senior. So he kind of stepped into that role in a professional sense and was just an incredible mentor. And I learned, everything from, how to get deep into Excel, which is probably the single most valuable business tool in the world, or Google Sheets in our case. All the way down to how to treat our people. And he, to this day, being gone for 2 years as of this month, he still influences me in a million ways. As I said, he was more conservative than I was in terms of how he ran the business and how he approached the world. But that also gave us the runway to take all the time to learn what we did and whatnot. And really, it was the opposite of me in some very valuable ways that balanced me out. And, he was someone that was always there. And I still have so many amazing memories of him that drive, so much of my decision-making today. So yeah, his name was Rich Morgan. He was a co-founder of the company and just an awesome guy. And I would definitely say he's the biggest business influence I've ever had. And even what you just addressed with humility, he was a guy that was happy to give up the CEO role to me to let me take on the next generation of the company. And, he never once thought about leaving. He just moved to another role that fit his skill set, and we just kept going, and it was great.
I love that. And in terms of a daily routine or a set of kind of, we spoke a little earlier, you mentioned going for a run on a regular basis. What are some of the kind of things that you find allows you to free your mind and quite honestly get stuff done also?
Yeah, so I'll start with that, and that isn't just me being an adult. That's me being scared of getting old. A couple years ago, I went in for a physical, and my doctor looked at my blood pressure and basically said, "Man, we could take you to the hospital right now. You're like 40 years old and at stroke level." And it was that point that I decided that I need to start moving a little bit more. So it's funny, I had an Apple Watch at the time and it sort of tracks your activity, and I had never really completed any of the daily activity stuff. But from that point on, I've completed exercise goals 7 days a week for, I think, 2.5 years now. Going to the gym and running, virtually every day has been a very important part of both clearing my mind and trying to live longer for my kids mostly. So definitely exercise is a big part of it. I would say, and unfortunately this isn't the case now and hasn't been for 6 months, but one of the biggest transitions was I have 8 one-on-ones a week. I have 8 VP directs, and I converted all of those one-on-one meetings to 2-mile walks. So I was doing 2-mile walks with them every day. And I would say of all the chaos that COVID has caused, that's maybe my biggest miss. I still do them on either Zoom or calls, but getting an opportunity to just get out with my team and talk, and to some that might sound like I was torturing them, but I promise you they all liked it. We all looked forward to just getting out of the office. We're in Southern California, so the weather is great 90% of the time, and it was just wonderful. Other than that, pretty much my job is split between operations, sales and marketing support, and engineering support. And I do those things in pretty much even thirds. So beyond the one-on-ones, I have team meetings with each of those teams. I spend a lot of time thinking about the company as a product and being a product manager to the company. And that was the thing that got me over the hump of really hating, frankly, the operations and HR side. Early in my career, having the engineering side and then moving to a lot of focus on product and marketing and sales, the sort of bureaucracy of running a company as an early CEO really wasn't fun for me. And that really did change when another CEO friend of mine basically suggested, this is a number of years ago now, but basically suggested, just look at the company as a product and then what would you do? And that just changed my perspective entirely. And I started to apply my engineering mindset more directly. It always thought like an engineer, but I got the opportunity to sort of think about it literally in that sense. And I think that's had a really good impact. So I know I'm a little bit all over the place here, but that's pretty much my time is a lot of meetings. It's a lot of brainstorming, which again is something I really miss, is the big whiteboard walls at our office. We've sort of transitioned that all to Zoom. I spent a lot of time brainstorming with my team. Something else that I'm very passionate about, I'm working on one right now, is I write what I've sort of self-described as manifestos. And about once a quarter, I write sort of an updated business plan to the entire company so that they have something written down, concrete, that is kind of the latest thoughts, the latest direction, the latest vocabulary. And I'm just very passionate about communicating with them consistently. And, you mentioned humility. Humility is a big part of my role, but also transparency. And at this point, I think that sounds cliche, but I do everything I possibly can to give people information to empower them. And, as you grow a company, that's something that you just innately have to do more of. There's only so many hours in a day, no matter how much as a CEO we might work. So I'm trying to be as transparent as I possibly can, specifically for the goal of empowering. So, I like your question because I think about it so differently between, COVID and pre-COVID. The neat thing about COVID and my one positive point is just how much more time, like I have 2 children that are young in elementary school, and how much more time I get to just see them throughout the day is kind of amazing. So they're, funny enough, part of my routine. When before I was getting home, 20 minutes before they'd go to bed, I'd, play video games with them for 20 minutes, and that was all I saw them in a day. Now, I can just walk outside my office and go say hi, give a hug, whatever, and things are a lot better. So, COVID's not all bad. I think technology is the hero, and we get to spend time with our families. So this new norm, in some senses, has some nice benefits.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I have 3 children myself, and my wife both work from home. She's in a large technology company as well. And, I get to wake my daughter up, or I heard my daughter wake up from her nap this afternoon, for example, which is a great example of being able to spend that little bit more time. I think you've really shared some important values that I certainly hold dear, and that we see in successful organizations. I want to thank you for the valuable insights you've been able to share with us and our audience today, because I've no doubt we'll speak again in relation to further value you can add to our audience in the marketplace. And love what you're doing, and really appreciate the time today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Ross. Thank you so much for taking the time, and I'd be happy to talk to you guys anytime. This was awesome.
It was our pleasure.
Thanks.
We'll talk again.
Thanks, Luke.
Thank you, guys.
You've been listening to the European Tech Hire podcast, designed for both established and aspiring career-focused tech rock stars, as well as helping global leaders figure out how to speak global in today's multicultural world. For further details, see sf/talent.com.